Hello, and welcome to today's special webinar event on 4 common types of hybrid work and the role of productivity measurement. Today's webinar is sponsored by ActivTrak and produced by ActivTrak Media. My name is Scott Becker. I'm from ActivTrak Media, and I'm excited to be your moderator for this special event. Now, before we get to today's great content, there are a few things you should know about this webinar. First off, we want this to be a very educational event for you, so we encourage any and all questions in the questions box in our webinar control panel. Not only will we have team members responding to questions during the live event, we'll also have a dedicated Q&A session at the end of the presentation where we'll discuss in greater detail some of the top questions that you ask. Second, in the handout section of your webinar control panel, you'll find that we're offering several resources. A link to get started called Work Wiser with ActivTrak. And then there are also links to the Gorilla Guide Book Club where you can get access to ActivTrak Media's great printed resources on technology topics, as well as a link to the ATM Event Center where you can find more fantastic events like this one. So I encourage you to download those handouts now and share them with your friends and colleagues. Third, at the end of this webinar event, we'll be awarding a $300 Amazon gift card to one lucky attendee on the live event. If you're watching this webinar on demand, I'm sorry, the drawing has already occurred. If you are the winner, you can choose to donate the value of that gift card to one of our selected charities. Thanks to generous prize winners on previous ActivTrak Media events, thousands of dollars have been donated to charity, so thank you in advance if you make that choice today. The official terms and conditions of today's prize drawing can be found at actualtechmedia.com. Just scroll to the bottom and you'll find the prize terms and the conditions link there. Finally, one of the best benefits of this event is the opportunity to ask a question of our expert presenters. To help encourage your questions, we have a special additional prize for you. That's another Amazon gift card, this one for $50 for the best question. At the end of the event, we'll look at all the questions, pick out the very best one, and contact that prize winner. And with that, let's get to today's fantastic content. So I'm excited to introduce you to our speakers today. We have Gabriela Malk. She's Vice President of the Productivity Lab at ActivTrak. And we have Javier Aldrete, VP of Products for ActivTrak. So Gabrielle and Javier, great to have you here. Gabriela, take it away.
Thanks so much, Scott. I appreciate it. Thanks to you, to those of you who are joining us today. I'm excited to dive deeper into our topic, which is the 4 common types of hybrid work and the role of productivity measurement. As Scott mentioned, I'll be joining you today in addition to our leader of product here, Javier Aldrete. We'll be going over these topics in 2 ways. One, we'll be laying the groundwork for the way that we think about hybrid work and productivity, and then we'll be deep diving into our product and giving you a bit of a demo. We recognize that as we go through this content today, it's important to understand the state of hybrid work today, some of the key challenges that are in front of us, and then how we can use measurement and analytics as a means to get insight into those things we cannot see. So here we have ActivTrak. And for those of you who are new to ActivTrak who don't know a whole lot about it, what ActivTrak is it's a solution that helps you work wiser. It's a workforce analytics platform that aims to help our customers gain visibility into how work happens so that you can provide employees with timely, tailored, and relevant support. The platform helps measure productivity to further understand how your organization functions, and perhaps more importantly, think about how your organization can improve. And so when it comes to improvement within the platform, you're able to set goals so that you can look at where you are today, where you want to go, and then understand how you can progress towards that. The platform itself gives us insights into things like burnout, engagement, and workload balance so that we can keep a pulse on the overall health of our organization so that we're able to ensure not only that they're productive today, but they're productive in ways that appear to be sustainable. We identify underutilized applications that oftentimes point to either having technologies that we no longer need, or more importantly, identifying training and development opportunities that your workforce might need that ultimately allows it to unlock a level of productivity. And then finally, the platform aims to look at how you can look at the way in which you are focused in the workplace, avoid distractions, and increase your ability to get into deep work or flow. So we'll be talking a bit about that today. In today's session, we'll talk about hybrid work, its common challenges, how we can get greater visibility to support your organization. Javier will take those concepts and apply them as he navigates us through the ActivTrak platform. And then I'll touch upon, before we close out here, the data that we can use to improve work practices. And so ultimately, the key message here is that while data is useful, it also can be very overwhelming, but we shouldn't be afraid of it. Instead, what we should do is we should focus on how we can upskill our managers and our leaders and our employees today to leverage data as a means to make accurate decisions to improve the workplace and improve our ability to get work done and ultimately work wiser. So let's talk a little bit about the hybrid work environment today. Our hybrid work environment consists of 3 categories of places. We have the at-home work environment, the in-office work environment, and what is today commonly referred to as that third place. And so for many of us, we can identify with that third place being a handful of places. That might be at a coffee shop. It might be at an airport waiting at a gate. It could be on the airplane. It could be visiting your in-laws. The third place is really the mixed bag of different spots that we find ourselves working in when we allow hybrid work to be an option within our workplace. And so across these 3 places, these 3 different types of places, there's a high level of variability. So in addition to the variability that I just outlined in the third place, in office can consist of a handful of different offices that your business has spread across the country or spread across the world. That can vary in terms of what that experience is like for your employee. So if you have one single office space, that in-office space could be a place for your organization to congregate. But if you find that you have a highly distributed workforce, for some of your employees, going into the office could be something that still is a very solitary activity. Perhaps no one else has gone into the office that day, given your hybrid work policy. Instead, it's just one person that's gone there to work alone. When we think about at home, we think about how dynamic the at-home workplace has been over the last 18 months. I don't know about you, but I know for me, when I think about joining on Zooms, I've gotten glimpses into people's kitchens, people's hallways, people's bedrooms, people's backyards. The at-home workplace is really dynamic as well, based on the amount of space that people are able to dedicate really having a focused work environment. And so what the key takeaway is here is that proper support for your workforce in all environments elevates your culture, enables performance, and ultimately propels your business. But what we need to figure out today as we go into really tackling this hybrid workplace is we need to understand how we can allow this to be a value add to our culture while not detracting from our productivity. There are 4 types of hybrid work that have been identified within the Productivity Lab that we describe as follows. We have universal work, which is applied across the organization with fixed days in the office and fixed days that are remote. The key takeaway here is that everyone within your business follows that same sort of policy. So Tuesdays and Thursdays are in the office, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday are at home. The benefit of this type of hybrid work setup is that it becomes very predictable what people's schedules are. People are able to get into a routine on a week-over-week basis. People are able to know when they're going to, they can set up meetings on Tuesday or Thursday because they can be in person and they can have that hands-on type of brainstorming and decision-making while reserving days at home, perhaps for more of that individual work and for some of those smaller team meetings. Variable work is applied across the organization, but the decisions are made at the team level. So it looks pretty similar to universal, except at a smaller scale. In this case, team leaders will work with their team to talk about what the needs might be in terms of in-person time versus remote time, and then set up an agreement within their team of individuals to come into the office on certain days and not be in the office on others. Now, this tends to provide a higher level of flexibility that that employees really welcome. The flip side of this is that this also can lead to more of a siloed environment, right? So one specific team might be in the office on Tuesdays and Thursdays, whereas another team might be on the office on Mondays and Wednesdays. But in reality, a working team on a project could have individuals from 2 different work policies, and those 2 individuals could rarely see each other. And so while variable allows higher levels of flexibility and autonomy from team to team, on the flip side, there's a risk of that cross functionality to not operate as seamlessly when people are in the office on different days. Flexible is applied across teams with decisions made at the manager and employee level. So now we've gotten to an even deeper level of granularity. In this case, an individual works with their employee and comes up with a schedule around when they'll be in the office and when they won't. Fluid, which happens to have the highest degree of variability, is when employees can choose when, how often, and where they work from. And so while this happens to be the highest level of autonomy and variability, there's a lot less predictability in this model. And so where this becomes a challenge for organizations to operate sustainably, it becomes hard to predict when people will be in the office, when they won't, what your office needs are in terms of desk availability and space. And so this one is one that I think many employees tend to prefer. It's a high level of autonomy and responsibility on the part of the employee to make these decisions. And so while it is oftentimes highly welcomed, it also comes with its set of challenges as well. And so we'll talk a little bit about these different hybrid workplaces a little bit more as we go through today's presentation. But what I want to do before we go further is ask this audience to reflect a bit on your own work policy today and share what your organization has adopted to date. So we'll give this one a little bit of time. The question is, what flexible work environment do you offer your organization today? Is it universal, variable, flexible, fluid, or do you not offer hybrid or remote work? All right. So when we think about the ask here, which is what is your workplace adopt today? One of the things I want to highlight before we go over the poll questions is what your organization offers today might not be what your organization offers in 6 months. And so what we're seeing in today's workplace is that organizations are really trying to figure out what works best for them. And we might not always get it right the first time. And that's okay. I think everybody's sort of looking for that pass that says, hey, it's going to take us some time. I use the example of Upwork pretty often, who's really changed its work policy 3 or 4 times in the last year, really trying to adapt to what their employees are looking for. So for those of you who are answering this question, and what I'm not asking you is how it's working for you, right? And so one of the things that I would encourage you all to do is to not only reflect on the work on the option of the hybrid option that you're offering today, but also reflect on the question is how effective is it? It seems as if in this group, the majority of you are currently offering flexible, which means that it's varying between the manager and the individual. And so this is a really common model. What it does, though, when we select this model, what you should be thinking about is the fact that when managers and individuals are empowered to make these decisions on their own, it is important that your manager has the skill set to provide that individual with the coaching they need to be productive, to be engaged, to manage burnout, and have a level of work-life balance that's effective for them to work with your organization in a sustainable way. And so what happens within the flexible work environment is that we really need to upskill our managers so that not the individual is able to make the decision that might be effective for their particular life situation and life circumstances, but that the manager can then give them the tools they need to be effective. The second one here is 25% of you said that it was variable across the team. This one I find to be a really effective one in that, you still have a level of autonomy and that level of autonomy also still ensures that you have access to your team members. And so this is a really effective one as well. Whereas in the case of flexible, where the manager has that skill of working with the individual, in this case, the manager really needs to have that skill of aggregating the needs of the team and identifying a schedule that works for most, if not all of the individuals. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. What I want to do next is kind of talk about the challenges that we see in the workplace today that are associated with these different models, and they're associated with all of them. So regardless of what you selected, what I want to highlight here is that now we've shifted to kind of the models that are most top of mind. These models include this operating model shift. So in the last 18 months, nearly all of us were forced to operate in a different way. That meant that we were working from home. It meant that we had distractions in our workplace that looked different than our distractions in the past. And it meant that our processes were in flux as we navigated that. Employee engagement, not only did we have employees that were distracted by the external consequences of having a worldwide pandemic, we also face the internal engagement and distractions from just working in a different capacity. And so that impacts both engagement and it impacts burnout. Burnout, as we shifted to working from home, many of us struggle with this concept of always being on. And when we're always on, are we working too many hours? And when we're working too many hours, what is the degree in which ultimately that no longer becomes sustainable and people either become less engaged, they leave our organization, or they just stop caring about their work in the way that we need them to? When we can't see the workplace, it's hard to see that burnout. And that oftentimes leads to uneven workload across teams. It's really hard to see when some teams are bearing the brunt of the workload while others aren't when we're working in a remote environment. So this has become a very top of mind challenge as well. Disruptions and multitasking has become a prevalent issue, both in work and out of work. As we see on our phones today, there are more and more mechanisms in which we can silent our notifications, silent them for specific amounts of time, all in the service to increasing our ability to focus. And so now, as we're working from home, those distractions and those disruptions have taken on new forms, whether that means other people in our home also working, children in our home, easier temptations for distractions than there are in the office, etc. And then the final piece is inefficient technology and/or processes in the workplace. And so that could be because what was once efficient in the office when everybody was together is no longer efficient in a remote capacity. It also could be that there are just so many different things going on in our workplace, we tend to lose sight of the technology that's available, and it can oftentimes go unused. Despite the limited visibility that exists today in the hybrid work environment, whether or not you have people in the office or at home on a predictable basis or not, right? So your universal policy or your fluid policy, on either end of the spectrum, there's significantly less visibility into how our employees are doing. And while the amount of visibility has drastically decreased, the ask of the leader has stayed the same. We're still asking leaders to make sure that their organization is productive and that work is getting done. We're still asking leaders and managers to ensure that their organization and their teams are aligned and that the work connects to the teams and business's broader strategies. We're asking our leaders and managers to help our employees feel engaged. We're asking them to help our employees feel as if they are healthy and balanced and able to come to work as their best self on a continuous basis. We're asking managers to ensure that each employee is able to grow and that as they grow and they have new capabilities, that they're on a career path to stay within our organization. And then finally, and most importantly, we're asking our leaders to ensure that we still have a mechanism in place to ensure that our employees are treated equitably and that they're exposed to fair experiences, all of the employees. And so these asks have been the same from when we were in the office to when we were fully remote to now when we're in a hybrid environment. But our tools that we've used for years are now being challenged because we can't see those things that we once were able to see. Now, to be honest, when we could only see things, that came with its own level of bias as well. But what the point that I'm trying to get to here is that we now need to come up with a mechanism to have a stronger pulse on our employees' experience to ensure that they can be healthy and engaged in the work that they're doing. Ultimately, this healthy engagement leads to their ability to be productive. We must devise a way to support our employees and leveraging productivity analytics to efficiently surface the opportunities and provide support quickly and efficiently to those who need it most. When we don't do this, we find that we have drops in productivity, increases in turnover, decreases in engagement, and ultimately these things lead to lower business performance. So let's talk a little bit about greater visibility. I think we're going to tee it up here for Javier to go into his demo. But before we do that, what I want to highlight is what our customers are asking us today. And I would hope that some of these questions you all are asking of yourselves. And I certainly feel confident that Javier will be able to walk us through how we can answer some of those questions. But let me highlight a few of them for you first. Our customers are asking, how do I assess pre and post baselines as teams return to the office or go remote? In other words, if I'm going to modify my working policy, how am I to know whether or not the policy I had yesterday is more or less effective than the policy my employees are asking for tomorrow? And so if you decide, which I personally fully endorse, if you decide to engage with your employees and construct a work policy that is effective for your organization, because it's not a one-size-fits-all decision, it is still incumbent upon you to measure whether or not that new work policy that they've asked for has actually delivered the results that you're looking for. And that might be consistency in their work schedule. That might be the degree to which they're able to focus. That might be a metric around work-life balance, around workload balance in general. And so the questions that customers are asking is, hey, if I'm going to change this, how do I know what has changed? Not what do I hear, but how do I know? Customers are asking, how do I keep a pulse on engagement levels? How do I know that people are engaged and tied to their work? How do I measure productivity trends? So if people are feeling really productive for 3 weeks in a row, does that actually lead them to start kind of burning out? And what does that look like on week 4? How do I identify how and where to build more focus time into the day? So how do I help my employees reflect on their habits and then continue them or modify them if they need? How do I assess workload balance and burnout risk? So a lot of our customers are saying, hey, I'm really nervous. People are burning out and I have no idea. I can't see it. I can kind of hear it in their voice, but I don't want to assume. I don't know whether or not they're working on the weekends or they're just saying they're working on the weekends. I'm worried that people are beyond a point that I actually see that they are. And then finally, how do I invest in the right technologies to ultimately have an effect on their ability to be productive? And so the investing in the right technologies is a question that kind of goes hand in hand with assessing pre and post baselines. If you're going to invest in technology to make your organization more focused and more productive, how do you know that it's happening? And so that's another question that people have as it pertains to not having the visibility that we need. And so this leads us to working with ActivTrak. I've gone over this before and kind of what ActivTrak is, which is this platform that helps you work wiser and answer a lot of these questions. The way that ActivTrak works, before we get into the demo here, is oftentimes the question that we field in the Q&A that we've made the decision to kind of put in here before we do the demo to dispel some of the common questions around ActivTrak. The way that ActivTrak works is it deploys agents to users' computers, and that activity data is then collected in the ActivTrak platform where it's classified and enriched. Data is visualized in real-time dashboards and reports. Leadership, managers, and employees are all able to receive insights that help them better manage engagement, burnout, focus, work habits, and more. These reports are certainly configurable in terms of who has access to them. But here at ActivTrak and in the Productivity Lab, what we recommend is that when we share the access to those types of insights for specific individuals, they're able to be part of the solution to improve the productivity of the work environment. And so a lot of times the way this is done is via subscriptions, so that I know I have access to seeing personal insights on my own work on a weekly basis. When we think about how we look at productivity at ActivTrak, we look at productivity today through the lens of how time is being spent and how that time is being spent on productive applications. So we have total time, which represents the total amount of time collected within ActivTrak. Within that total time, that can be divided into 3 key categories: productive time, which is here in green, unproductive time, and undefined time. And so our customers, we will automatically classify those applications. Our customers then have the ability to modify those classifications Because what we recognize is that what is productive for one team, i.e., the marketing social media team might have find Facebook very productive, is unproductive for another. And so that has the ability to be customized and configurable from team to team. And so what we do is we add up all that time that's spent in the productive applications, and we get an insight into the degree of productivity for a particular individual, and then for a team, and for a department, and for an organization. Now, what we know to be true is that time isn't the only indicator of productivity, and we don't claim that it is. But what it is this is an indicator into people's habits that allow us to think about when to take action as managers and when to start coaching to allow people to think more effectively about how to use that time so that they can, in fact, be more productive. Within total time, there's another breakdown around active time and passive time. Active time is when we're sitting at our computer and actively engaging with the device, whereas passive time might be more reflective of us sitting on a Zoom call and being present, but not necessarily engaging with our device. With that background, we think it's really important to kind of lay that foundation that tends to be, it's always, it's unfortunate to see those questions lingering on people's minds as Javier goes through his demo. So hopefully with that background, that sets the foundation to Javier to go through some of the capability and functionality here within the tool itself.
Great. Thank you, Gabriela. And thank you for the folks asking questions in the chat. I think some of them were addressed by Gabriela, others I'll address as I go through the demo. But the demo flow that I'm going to use is I'm going to show you two stories. There's going to be one around how do we help team leaders, organization leaders identify workload balance and burnout risk. Where can we help people give more focus or deep work time into the daily routines? And then also I'm going to show a second demonstration from the eyes of the individuals in a team and how they get their own personal insights. And all of this while preserving the employee privacy and trust. There were some questions around that and data access controls, which we'll cover some of it through the demo, some of it after the demo. There is a slide where we'll cover all the controls that we have around that. Okay, so with that, let me share my screen. Hopefully you can see a screen that says coach in the title. If not, let me know. But so as I mentioned, this is the ActivTrak user interface. So as Gabriela mentioned, there are data collectors sitting at the different computers, and they're uploading the data to our cloud where we classify it, we give it meaning, we apply all the privacy controls to ensure that only work-related activities are surfaced depending on your criteria. We make sure that the people that should have the right access have the right access. And this is the type of information that will bubble up to a leader or a manager. And so I'm going to assume that role in the context of a technology company that has a number of engineers, developers, product managers, designers, and so forth. So as I walk through that, you will see that type of information showing up here. So this particular interface, the coach feature, allows managers to identify where there are opportunities to help their teams identify early signs of burnout or risk of fatigue through high utilization scenarios. Also, areas where there might be low efficiency, meaning a lot of time online, but not on the right things aligned with the particular job, and therefore they have an opportunity to get more time back of their personal lives and well-being by being more efficient. And then the last one, focus, where we can identify areas where distractions or constant interruptions can lead to lower productivity and quite frankly, in some cases, some insanity. Because if you get pinged all the time, you might feel a little anxious through your work. So I'm going to dive into the first type. So in this case, it has flagged that a number of team members have areas where they're highly utilized. The way we identify high utilization is by defining what we call a healthy range of digital activity. And that's based, as Gabriela mentioned, on the notion of setting goals by team or team members. So certain team members may have certain goals that are different from others. And based on that information, as well as the digital activity that we're collecting, we're able to see, for instance, that Matthew F. in this case is above the healthy range by almost 3 hours per day. And that's by looking at over the last 30 days. So it's not a one time, 1 day, 1 week type of scenario. It's a sustained average that tells us that there is something that we can do to help Matthew in this particular case. The same you can see Derek, and as I go through the list, some of these may be at lower risk within the scenario, but these are the ones that either have a lot of utilization in the digital side, or they're not spending enough time with breaks. So for instance, to pick on Fernando here, his break time is on the lower side versus the suggested break time based on the number of activities in the digital work that he's doing every day, right? So that those are the two ways that you can show up in this list. Now, from here, as a manager, I can look at the coaching advice from our productivity experts, Gabriela's team actually, and see what are the potential actions that a manager can take. Some of it might be changing deadlines. Some of it might be taking some time off or reallocating work from person A or team A to team B so that there is more of that load balance. And there are other techniques as well as additional resources that we link from here for managers to reach and access. And then the other thing that managers can do is they can drill into a little more detail and say, how did the particular individuals that were flagged in the red zone, right, the overutilized zone, compare to other team members? Are there folks in the green or healthy area in this list that can pick up some of the work from those in the red? Other things that you can do here as a manager is say, I want to understand whether this particular individual, for instance, the trend of their activity. And in this case, you can see that Matt has been close to the 60-hour range of a couple of weeks, but in a couple of other weeks, it is a little bit lower. But overall, he has had a lot of overutilized days. And that's why he was flagged with that particular area. And again, it represents a great opportunity for his manager or his leader to intervene and give him some help and some support. So that is the particular first scenario that we help managers, this overutilization scenario. There are others, as I mentioned, are efficiency and focus. I'm going to jump into the focus one just to give you a different example of these out-of-the-box analytics that we provide. In this particular example, what we're looking at is the differentiation between focus time, collaboration time, and multitasking. So the way we identify that information is by looking at the digital activity that you have through the day. So if you are moving in quick progression between different applications or different screens, we may flag that time when you're doing that as multitasking. When you're spending time on meetings or in chats like Slack or MS Teams, that might be flagged as collaboration, whereas focus time is when you are doing one thing at a time, right? And whether that's writing a design, doing coding, creating a presentation, working on a web page, but one thing at a time, that's going to be marked as focus. And in this case, the different team members had a certain goal that is not being met. So Andrew, in this first one here, has had a goal that he's missing by 2 hours of focus time. And most of the time that is not spent in focus, which is only 28%, is spent on collaboration. So he may be having a lot of meetings or a lot of time spending on chatting and messaging tools. In his case, Slack is a top application that is dropping him from that focus because he's probably collaborating and doing a lot of interaction through that particular collaboration tool called Slack. So in his case, the potential action items would be, can you mute Slack for a couple of hours a day to get back some of that focus time and be able to get some of those designs or deep work done? Can you get out of some meetings? Are there particular days or times of the day where you can block off of no meeting time, for instance, as another strategy to get more of that deep work time going? Okay, so that's another type of opportunity that we flag through Coach. The third element that I want to show you around Coach is the notion of closed loop analysis. This is the scenario where by looking at this progress report, a manager can look at the team and say, what has happened after we identify these particular opportunities? These opportunities, as you can see, the different dates that were identified for utilization, efficiency, and focus. Red means that the behavior that led to be identified as that has continued. So in this case, Jeff, Fernando are in the red zone because they are highly utilized continuously after it was flagged. And so we need to do a different strategy perhaps because what we have tried has not worked. Whereas for other individuals, you can see that they got in the green. So that means they got out of the high utilization scenario. And that's great. It's a great opportunity to praise them and praise their managers as whatever you did to get them out of that particular red zone has worked, and we want to sustain it so that they can stay with us for the long run and their well-being is well kept for them. Efficiency, same notion, and then as you can see, focus too, right? The idea here is being able to tell the manager and the leaders what has happened, and can we create and drive the right habits around this particular scenarios that we have identified as opportunities. Okay, so keep your questions coming. I see them going. We'll cover them at the end. So this was the first part of the demo where I wanted to share what managers can see to help and identify opportunities to help their team members to get a more efficient, better workload balance, and better well-being at work. The second use case that I'm going to share with you is that of the individual. So in this case, I flipped into a feature called Personal Insights. And this acts like your Fitbit, but for the workplace. So instead of the Fitbit giving you the number of steps that you did or how well you slept, this gives you your personal statistics of your screen time, how much of that has been on business applications, how much of that has been focus, collaboration, what are my trends over the last few days, the last few weeks, how do I compare against my team members, in this case, the team benchmarks from the product management team. And so that way, as an individual, I can see, great, I'm hitting my productive goals. And in fact, I'm surpassing them. I might be getting close to that burnout area. I need to be careful. I'm not quite getting there on the focus hours, but I'm close on my goals. Maybe I can do a little bit better. In collaboration, I might be doing a little too much. So maybe I can reduce my time spent on Slack or on meetings. And I can see how every other team member are doing there, and I can help or request help from my team members. How are they getting to these particular statistics themselves? You can see my last few days, how I've done on these different metrics. Certain days are higher in focus time than others. Maybe the ones that have lower is because I have more meetings. And so that helps me. And when I get into more actionable analytics, I can see which are the type of applications that might be robbing or affecting that focus in my particular use case or scenario. In this case, for me, Slack and Zoom meetings, not surprising, as well as I can see with these bubbles in green, the ones that are driving the context switches, right? And or attention shift, and it's email notifications and Slack what are driving that. And as I showed you before, on the right-hand side, you see this different great productivity lab advice, guidance to help. How do you get more focused time? How do you ensure you have good balance and wellness by staying in the healthy zone and not getting into that red overutilized area? How is that trending over time? The last couple of weeks, I have been keeping it in check, which is great. And also, where am I spending my time? We talk a lot about the different types of work, but you can drill all the way down to what are the categories of activities that I'm doing? How much of that is on office products, on meeting software, writing email, writing code, analytics, etc. Okay, so this is something that you can access on a regular basis. You can actually even go and create a subscription and get this delivered to your email on a daily or weekly basis to keep track of your own reporting. And as I said, act like your workplace Fitbit. So with that, I am going to switch back to the presentation and stop sharing and go to the next slide that covers the controls around security and data access and privacy. So a lot of the questions that came through were, how do you ensure that privacy is maintained and that the trust of the individuals and the employees is maintained? We have a number of capabilities in our platform, from role-based access to ensure that people only see the 2 or 3 features that they should be seeing, or the 2 or 3 reports that they should be seeing, as well as data access to ensure they're only seeing their own data or their own team data. You can also configure when this is scheduled to run so that you're not capturing times that the employees have not agreed to be on at work activities, and therefore you can obfuscate that. You can also even hide non-work activities or non-business activities so that all of that gets obfuscated or hidden and only focus on the time and the applications that are related to work. So all these different pieces are used by companies like yours to control and adapt and tailor to get the right level of trust, as well as to whatever your culture accepts in terms of sharing of this information. Some people prefer just keeping it to themselves. Some people want to share it with their managers, so their managers act as coaches, while others only want to see the aggregate information at the company level so that they can see and understand where they should act or have programs that will help the employee base. So with that said, I'll hand it over to Gabriela to conclude the remarks.
Thanks for that, Javier. I appreciate that. One of the things that we want to close off on today is to take us from what we're seeing here in Javier's demo to how we can use the data as it pertains to these very specific pain points that we feel today. Today, when we use productivity analytics, we're able to spot risks early on so that we can address them proactively. And so for many of you, you might already have mechanisms in place within your organization to rise up to address things like burnout and distractions and collaborations. And for those of you who already have those mechanisms in place, I challenge you to ask yourself, what would be the benefit if you could identify those issues sooner? And when we can identify those issues sooner, we find ourselves in a better position to, one, stop the degree to which these issues can be contagious across the workforce. And then, of course, relieve that type of pressure and hardship on our employees before it becomes even greater. And so burnout can oftentimes lead to low engagement, dips in wellness, attrition of our employees, and quality issues in our work. Distractions can lead to distraction fatigue, disrupted problem solving, and limited creativity. And collaboration, when done too much, can lead to decreased in collaboration or excessive collaboration. And that can oftentimes lead to misalignment. And so I'm curious, before we close out today, of these three challenges that I'm mentioning, which is most prevalent in your workplace today? Oftentimes what we see is that the prevalence of some of these issues feed off on others. In other words, when our organization is feeling highly distracted, that can lead to burnout. When there's excessive amounts of collaboration, that also can lead to burnout. So it's very common that these end up being linked to one another. What we're seeing in the results here, as I close it out, is that we're seeing that really there's both burnout and distractions are what about a third of us are feeling, with a level of collaboration fatigue as well. And so with that, I want to close us out on talking very specifically at a quick glance, how we can use burnout metrics to better understand early on when burnout is taking place. And so some of these visuals should look familiar after Javier's demo, where we look at the top left and we can see those individuals that are working well beyond the threshold. We can look at the top right and see how productivity trends over time can show the ebbs and flows of people's ability to be productive, and how that lack of stability in those numbers can lead to fatigue. We can see how users are spending their time throughout the day, whether or not they're taking enough breaks. And then we can see sort of a comparison of those that are working in the top quartile versus the average of a team, and where individuals fall within that, to have better insight into the degree to which people might be at risk of burnout. We take a look at distractions. Analytics allow us to see the average focus hours individuals are able to reach. The average focus session is on average, how many minutes can they go without being distracted. So oftentimes people are surprised to learn that the average across our customer base is right there around 12 minutes. And so if we can expand that time in which our employees are able to focus, we can ask ourselves just how much higher of a quality of level of work will we get? How can we avoid levels of fatigue by having distractions? When we're distracted, it takes us approximately 23 minutes to get back into a level of focus. And so if we can decrease those distractions, we can also decrease the fatigue that's associated with them. Analytics give us insight into what is pulling our attention away, so that when we want to solve for distractions, we know where to turn our attention. And time distribution tells us the degree to which we're spending our time multitasking, collaborating, and focusing. And then finally, when we look at collaboration fatigue, we look at the degree to which collaboration tools are pulling our attention away from our work. And then we can look at the breakdown of time across collaboration and focus, and better understand whether or not too much collaboration is happening, or in some cases, not enough, right? Because it's also within collaboration where we share ideas, where we get alignment, and where we derive a sense of culture and belonging within our organization as well. And so this leads us to the essential benefits of visibility, hopefully are articulated in today's presentation. It's important to identify and validate potential issues before they become bigger problems. Through using productivity analytics, we can get actionable recommendations to help increase team productivity, engagement, and well-being. We can better align on goals and objectives. We can become more effective coaches, which is the responsibility of us as leaders and managers. And we can most importantly, we can validate whether that coaching is effective. So for those of you who are either making systemic changes for your entire business, or those of you who are joining us today as managers of teams, the biggest question we should be asking ourselves is, how do I know if what I'm doing is working? And that's what analytics help us do. Before we shift to the Q&A here, major takeaways is that the workplace is evolving and it's exacerbating our workplace challenges, particularly those that we can no longer see. Our inability to identify obstacles and challenges puts employee productivity, engagement, and retention at risk. And so we must find a way to collect these insights so that we can better serve our employees. Using productivity analytics, organizations are able to get ahead of these risks that threat the performance of our business and, most importantly, the wellness of our employees. And so it's incumbent upon us to equip our managers with ongoing insights to ensure that the workforce can continuously grow in productivity, engagement, and wellness. So with that, I direct you to a handful of resources that we offer you here at ActivTrak so you can get started on this journey. If you're already on the journey, we'd love to take you further. So we have our help center. The Productivity Lab has a blog where we oftentimes write about these challenges, and a resource center that can provide you with even more readings to guide you in improving your workplace and getting the analytics in place that you need today so that you can have a level of ongoing insight into where your employees need support. With that, I'll pause for Q&A. Scott, feel free to join us here, and Javier as well, sort of guide us through the questions that our audience has shared with us.
Yeah, sounds good. Great presentation, Gabriella, and thanks for the demo, Javier. And I'm going to go ahead and pop it back onto the helpful resources slide just so people can grab those links if they want to, and we'll go ahead with the questions. But this is so timely, and we've had a lot of questions roll in. There's one class of questions that are more philosophical about what's the best approach to remote versus in-office work, and we'll set those questions to the side and pursue more of the questions directly about the specifics of the ActivTrak solution. But I will say, for anyone interested in that broader side of these questions, I'd like to point out a lengthy New York Times feature today called "What Bosses Really Think About the Future of the Office." Story quotes CEOs from Google, Upwork, PwC, Harrison Street, and some others, and you might find it interesting. So Gabriella, this first question I want to direct to you. Can you elaborate on how an organization goes about using productivity metrics without disrupting their workforce or turning people away?
Sure, absolutely. So when we think about productivity metrics, we have to think about the broader philosophical questions that you sort of just mentioned there, Scott. We have to be having these conversations at the same time. If you're thinking about using productivity metrics and rolling them out in your workplace without asking yourself these bigger questions, such as what type of hybrid workplace do I want? What type of culture am I trying to cultivate? What are the pain points of my employees today? How am I going to solve them? Then oftentimes these productivity metrics really can flounder, and it's tough to get that adoption and that buy-in from your managers and your employees that you really want to be using them. What I would suggest where you start is asking yourself these questions. What are we going to employ for our hybrid workplace? What is the best size for my business? What is the best strategy for my business? How am I going to go about standing up that program? And when I go about standing that program, how am I going to have an ongoing set of metrics to ensure that it's effective, or going to alert me when it's not effective and I need to try something different? So my answer to this question is, when we think about using productivity analytics, we have to fold it into a broader discussion about the employee experience that you're trying to set up. And you have to start getting strategic about how you're going to set up the workplace and then how you're going to measure it.
Great. And let me turn the question to Javier. based on a couple of questions that have come in from the audience. The first one's from Christopher, who's asking, does the end user have access to review their own performance metrics?
Yes, definitely. And I want to suggest that we use the word more around work and digital activity. Performance is a much more complex formula, as you might imagine. You also require the output information that different team members will have through the other systems and through observation. But the digital activity information that we capture is available for the individuals to see. And that was the last part of my demonstration through that personal insights dashboard that had my weekly statistics and my trends and all of that. That is how that is made available to each individual.
Super. This next question comes from Rakesh. He's asking, what are the best practices for protecting corporate IP or confidential info, when you have a remote workforce? And so I'll direct that one to Javier as well. Are there elements of the tool, that address that kind of stuff?
Yes, I would say that we play a role in that from the perspective of if what you're trying to do is, for instance, prevent data leaks or data leaving the organization by ignorance or just distraction. There are certain pieces of our platform that allows you to identify where that is occurring and being able to alert of an IT administrator that is occurring. That is one of the angles. Now, the other angle is that with all the information that we're capturing, as I mentioned, we have a number of privacy controls that ensure that anything that is personal information is obfuscated or excluded altogether, so that you never get also in a risk scenario where you're capturing too much information. Right. So those are the two angles that I will respond that to. But I think the platform has enough of the features that you can use for both scenarios that I described.
Okay. And one more sort of technical question I'll direct to you from Christopher. What kind of PC overhead does the client add, with the tracking for the end user?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's incredibly lightweight. Most people don't even notice it. It requires very little bandwidth. It works fairly well in outside of the office, meaning when you have remote offices or where people are working from home, given our new setups today. So it's basically not perceivable by the individual. It's just happening in the background with very little interaction, if not any interaction with their normal work activity, so they wouldn't have to be distracted or annoyed by it.
Okay, super. Gabriela, next couple of questions. I want to combine some questions that have come in for you. So how do you see productivity metrics playing, a role in the evolving workplace? And then, who owns productivity in an organization, or from your perspective, who should be owning it?
Yeah, that's a great question, or a great series of questions. I appreciate that. So let's take them one at a time. I think when it comes to productivity, I and how productivity analytics fit into the broader picture. Ultimately, when we think about digital activity, it provides us with insight into the ongoing behavior of our employees and of our organization. And when we use those metrics in a healthy way, it provides us something that's very unique that we haven't had in the past. So, for many of us, we're very familiar with sentiment data, whether that be through town hall feedback or something more sophisticated, such as an engagement survey. It's important to understand how our employees are feeling. It's also important to understand what our employees are doing and how does the impact of what they're feeling play a role in what they're doing on a daily basis. Does this lead them to work harder? Does it lead them to disconnect? Does it lead them to work more inconsistently when they're feeling disengaged? And so, in my opinion, when we think about the employee experience of the future, in productivity analytics and ongoing and insight into ongoing digital behavior serves as a way to provide a more holistic story as we're trying to understand how we can better serve our employees. Engagement and sentiment data, as you know, is something that's collected at best often on a quarterly basis and usually on an annual basis. But again, this ongoing mechanism gives us insight on a daily and weekly basis to understand how our employees are doing and whether or not we need to intervene to better support them. Now, the second part of this question is who owns it? And that really comes down to your organization and how your leadership team looks. And in general, this is a topic that should have a level of ownership across your entire set of leaders. More specifically, I asked the question of who owns culture within your organization? Is it your chief people officer? Is it your CEO? Who is the owner of making sure that the employees in your workplace are engaged, they're healthy, and they're feeling aligned to the work that they're supposed to be doing? And in that case, that oftentimes lends itself to an answer of being the CEO or the chief people officer. Now, in order to come up with a mechanism to really, leverage these analytics, there's a triangle that takes place as well. And that triangle, within that triangle sits the IT organization, because we're looking at digital behavior, the operations organization, because we're looking at how the organization is operating on a daily basis, and then the people organization or the HR function, because we're dealing with the behavior of our individuals. And so if you don't have those three people at the table problem solving on how to improve what your numbers are today for the future, then oftentimes you find that the program that you put in place can struggle. And so you want to make sure that you have those three individuals at the table when it comes to thinking about how to elevate performance and productivity.
Great advice. Thank you. This next question, actually, I'm going to combine two questions. Gilbert had two questions. Javier, I want to present to you. So, one is, how do you distinguish between single tasking and multitasking? And then he asked, how would you track a user performing analytical work, active time, while also on a Zoom call, passive time?
Great questions. Let me start with the second one because that builds into the first one. The way we identify is any given time in every operating system that we use for our computers, there is the notion of an active window, an active screen, if you will. So even if when you have 2 or 3 monitors, there is only one that has a focus, and that's the one that we are observing and collecting information. Hey, you're 2 minutes in this particular one, 32 seconds in this one, and so forth and so on, right? And so the time that wherever you are, then we look at, are you interacting with your keyboard, with your mouse? Are you scrolling? Are you moving your mouse, etc.? And that's what we denote as active. Once there has been more time without doing any interaction with your peripherals of your computer, then is where we will start marking that as passive, like being in a Zoom meeting or watching a video would qualify as that. But all these settings are actually configurable. By default, it's 2 minutes. So if we see more than 2 minutes without you having interaction with your computer, we will start flagging that time from there on as passive, but still retain where you were. And if when you come back, the whole thing restarts, right? So that's how we denote active versus passive. And both are qualified, and both will know what was the last application you were on, so that you can say, well, I was passive productive in a Zoom meeting, for instance. The second equation or the second question was more around multitasking versus deep work or focus work. And the way we do that is by looking at how many of these active screens you are in a limited amount of time. So we say in the last 60 seconds, or we break the day by minutes. And when you are progressing or switching between a number of these screens, tabs in your computer, and when you pass a certain threshold, which is also configurable, I think it's around 3 or 4, that's where we will say, you know what, at this stage, it looks like you are just switching between multiple contexts or multiple tasks, and therefore we will flag that as multitasking. Whereas when we see you staying within the same couple of screens over the same application, then we will flag that as focus or deep work.
Okay, super. And unfortunately, we've probably only got time for one more question. Gabrielle, I'll direct this one to you, and maybe combine a couple questions here from Lisa and Warren, just about sort of, persuading, both management and employees that this application is a good idea. It should be prioritized. How do you get leadership teams to care about the topics and make sure that they understand the value?
Yeah, that's a great question. Understanding the value of a solution like ActivTrak or any level of workplace analytics like these, it is derived from an ongoing level of measurement, taking actions, and then showcasing improvement. Now, you know as well as I do that that's not something that you can do in the first week. Well, you can start gleaning insights into things you might never have gotten visibility into before. Taking action on them and then seeing improvement is really where you see that strongest level of value. What I think you can do at the beginning stages of sharing a solution like ActivTrak with your organization is, one, you can have an open and honest conversation with your employees that says, look, we're really here to support you, and this is the mechanism we're going to use to do that. Here are some of the things on the table for support that we'd like to provide once we better understand the support that's needed. And so what you do is you start developing a level of trust and the commitments that you're eager to make to your employees to make their work lives better. And that's where you can really start getting that buy-in in. The idea here is that transparency and co-collaboration with your workforce is really the name of the game. And it's what's going to build buy-in and trust from your managers and in your employees to start seeing that this is a solution to elevate the way that they work and provide support rather than monitor it.
Excellent. Okay. Yeah, elevating the way they work. That's a great way to leave it. Really appreciate the presentation, Gabriella and Javier, and thanks for all the insights on the Q&A. This has been great. Really appreciate your time here. So before we wrap up, we have one more piece of business. It's the $300 Amazon gift card prize drawing. And the winner of the $300 Amazon gift card is Carla Ness from Texas. So congratulations to Carla. We'll be in touch to get you your card. And with that, on behalf of the Actual Tech Media team, I want to thank Gabriella and Javier for putting together this really informative presentation. And I'd also like to thank ActivTrak for making this event possible. And last but not least, I'd like to thank all of you for attending and for all of your excellent questions during the Q&A portion. So that concludes today's event. Have a great rest of your day.